This video is in response to part 2 of Fox News Sunday's interview with Rush Limbaugh this past weekend. Now, at the very beginning of part 2, you will see that the host asks Rush a question about whether the government perhaps has a moral obligation to make sure that everybody has health insurance. And I wish Rush addressed it, and he really didn't. He talked about there being other methods for achieving the same outcome, i.e. everybody gets health insurance coverage. But I want to focus on something else. I think it's absurd to talk about the government's moral obligations per se. I mean, government doesn't have moral obligations. There's nobody named government. Government is not a person. Government does not and cannot have moral obligations. Government has specific powers and responsibilities prescribed to it by the Constitution and by legislation, but it doesn't have moral responsibilities. Individuals have moral responsibilities. People have moral responsibilities. We can talk about moral obligations or responsibilities of individuals, but never about moral obligations of governments. What kind of a moral obligation would we be talking about here? Okay, provide health insurance to everybody who needs it, who doesn't have it. Okay, well, some people choose not to have it. Fine, but there's some people who want to have it but can't afford it. Well, there's many things people can't afford but want. You can argue that other things that people can't afford may not be as important as health insurance. I don't know. They could if you're healthy, but listen, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The government has no moral obligation. How would it go about fulfilling the moral obligation? Robbing Peter to pay for Paul's health insurance? What kind of morality is that? I mean, the government does not have anything that doesn't belong to you and me. The government only has what it takes from us. So if we postulate that the government has a moral obligation to provide poor people who cannot afford a health insurance policy with health insurance coverage, that means that the government is obligated to rob more higher earners and to redistribute their wealth towards those who cannot afford health insurance. Well, I'm not even going into the fact that the conditions that have driven up the price of health insurance products are solely the responsibility and the consequences of what the government has done. I mean, close to 2,000 mandates existing in the United States on health insurance products, meaning the government dictates what can and cannot be offered as part of a health insurance product. The inability of health insurance companies to do business across state lines. There's a gazillion of limitations and regulations governing that industry, and that industry has a disappearingly small profit margin of 3.3%. So the costs have been driven up by government action. But let's leave that alone for a minute. I talked about the morality of taxes in my other video, and if you look at my channel, you'll find it. It's one of the more recent ones, where I argue that only individuals have moral choices, and only when those choices are free. The government would be doing no moral thing by confiscating more of my wealth and your wealth to give to some guy who cannot afford health insurance. If you feel obligated to help a poor person who cannot afford health coverage, you go buy them a health insurance policy. But don't dip into my pocket to do that without my consent. If I choose to help somebody, I will do it. In fact, I choose to donate to charities that provide health services, but that's my personal business. That's my personal business. Nobody's forcing me to do it. I ask nobody whether I should do it. I just do it. But to talk about the government's redistribution of wealth type policies as some kind of moral obligation or stemming from a moral obligation is absurd. I'm upset with Wallace for asking that kind of question, for phrasing that way, and I'm upset with Rush for not addressing that bullshit. See you later.